Welcome to the 2021 Island Feminism Speaker Series. My name is Dr. Noralis Rodriguez-Cos, and it is an honor to be your host for this panel. As a Puerto Rican feminist scholar who is a guest in the place where this presentation is physically hosted, Spokane, Washington, I want to begin this event by recognizing the traditional homelands of the Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, and Kalispel indigenous people who are connected through their shared history of this region. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, this is a space for scholars and activists working in islands and feminist studies to spark collaboration and interdisciplinary dialogue on social justice for islands and islanders. I want to also thank our attendees are connecting from different parts of the world and those that have contributed to this event, including our program assistants, Amity Malloy and Carla Peña, that are here with us today. My collaborator in this project, Dr. Marina Carides from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, our session sponsor, the Department of Gender and Women's Studies from Gonzaga University, and our speakers who I will introduce now. First, we have Alma Ouanesisouk, Trinidad. Hopefully I say that right, Alma.
Yes.
Thank you. As a macro social worker and scholar activist, Dr. Trinidad describes her voyage of service, the people and community as becoming a Pinay, Filipina, scholar warrior of Kapu Aloha, sacred love, Mahalaya, love and freedom. She brings an array of scholarly work and practice in community development and organizing policy analysis, organizational culture and processes, and collective impact in the areas of health promotion and education among diverse communities. Specifically, her work focuses on critical indigenous pedagogy of place, youth empowerment, social determinants of health and education, participatory research, social movements, and leadership and mentorship for social change. Cynthia Morris, our second speaker, is a native of Hilo, Hawaii. She attended California State University, Northridge, where she was earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in music. After graduation, she worked in the Los Angeles film industry on motion picture film editing crews. In 2010, she enrolled in graduate studies at the University of California at Santa Cruz and earned a master's degree in musicology. Her research focus on the music of 19th century Hawaii, the prison songs of Lili uokalani, is her master's thesis. She is an independent musicologist with her research focusing on the music of the Hawaii Islands. Cynthia moved back to the Big Island in 2018 and once again calls Hilo her home. And so before we begin our presentations today, I want to emphasize that this presentation is being recorded and it will be archived in our website for the public to watch and use as an educational resource. Our program assistant, Amity Malloy and Carla Peña, will keep attendees muted, but please feel free to write questions in the chat, which is the button in the menu. Malloy will collect those questions to be answered by the speakers during the Q&A section. And I will leave now the room to Alma Ouanesisouk Trinidad, who will begin with a presentation unearthing the toxic weeds of white supremacy, reflections of a Pinay scholar warrior of Aloha in decolonizing social work and health.
Thank you so much, Norales. It's funny, you know, when we talked about how we plan for a technical issue, right during Cynthia's introduction, I got disconnected. So anyhow, I'm glad that I'm back on on here. I hope you can see my shared screen. Give me a second to sort of get my fingers on this. Thank you so much for being present today on a Friday. You could have been any other places, but you're here today. So thank you so much for being here. The The title of my sharing is Unearthing the Toxic Weeds of White Supremacy. I'll be sharing reflections of my work in decolonizing social work and health. And with that, this is sort of the summary that I'd like to provide, how I unearthed this toxicity of white supremacy. We plan, or we hope to reground the soil and the world around us for Aloha. I'll share how I bring my authentic self to the work. I'll provide you with one example of critical praxis on coalition building here in Portland with the Oregon Pacific Island Coalition. And then I also share my insights on decolonizing and indigenizing social work education and health, particularly at Portland State University. So I grew up on the island of Molokai, and I also worked for quite a bit of Native Hawaiian community organization before I became a PhD. And a lot of my grounding and my work has been living on the island of Molokai. And so oftentimes, and you all who are from the island in Hawaii, there is this chant called Ehu Mai. Ehu Mai is usually chanted and sung when we gather, people of the mines, or when we embark in anything of significance and spirituality. I also heard this chant being used quite a bit when my daughter was in a hula halau here in Oregon. And I've adopted this chant every single time when I start a new course or a new convening of people, particularly students, when we talk about or come together in speaking about oppressive forces, trauma, and then our aim towards healing. And I guess this particular sharing, what major lesson is that knowledge and honoring our knowledges, ancestral knowledge, is important. So I'm going to sing this and also give you my own interpretation as a scholar. E ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai ke mai luna mai e. O na mea huna no e au, o na mele e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai ke mai luna mai e. O na huna no e au, o na mele e ho mai, e ho mai. I pai mo kada kamiti surga agapusa dingato dagiti sareb anatil mengatiki unoy. I pai mo kada kami, i pai mo kada kami, i pai mo kada kami. The later half, I shared with you the Ilocano version of that chant. So let me go back. The Hawaiian version is here. Ehu mai ka mai luna mai e. Give forth, come forth knowledge from above. Every little bit of wisdom contained in song, chant, stories, come forth, come forth, come forth. And I think, you know, one of the major reflection in doing any type of work in academy, as well as coalition building, does involve epistemology and knowledge production and knowledge building, and being mindful of the voices of the people. Being part of the academy has been such a treacherous journey, arriving to being tenured at a predominantly white institution. And coming from the islands, a lot of the values that I carried with me was often tested. And the stance of a Pinay scholar warrior of kapu aloha and mahalaya has provided me some grounding through the years, especially when times were hard and challenging, and when one was faced with contradictions. So Pinay, being Filipina, warrior, as we know, many of our island cultures around the Pacific Ocean basin, a lot of the warrior stance is rooted and grounded in our island cultures. It takes a stand of fighting for the ideals and values of our community. And as any warrior, and particularly in the Philippines, Gabriela Silang, who was also Ilocano, and I identify as Ilocano, coming from the north, fought along the sides of Filipino men against the Spanish colonial regime. So this stance aims for an anti-colonial stance, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and it aims to work towards refining a social justice framework that speaks to our indigenous values of barangay, barrio, small-time community, or townmanship and familia. Mahalaya is a Tagalog term, freedom, love. And here, the values of passionately holding to the beauty and the fierceness and the grace of teaching, mentoring, and serving, and even doing research for collective empowerment and determination. And here, I guess I want to emphasize always visioning and dreaming about freedom, collective freedom, as well as individual freedom, and unchaining those things that keep us chained up with ideals of individualism. Kapo Aloha, sacred love, stems from my roots of growing up on the island of Molokai, particularly around environmental justice. I was surrounded by quite a bit of elders growing up in the Native Hawaiian sovereignty movement, as well as the Filipino work there. But it speaks to that commitment to love, to fondly care for the people and the place in which things have been, injury has happened and oppression has happened, and aiming always for healing. So what brought me to Portland State University? To tell you the truth, it was one of the mission statement, let knowledge serve the city. But it's also a motto or a mission statement that I have to often revisit, because there's, like any other places of higher education, one needs to contest that meaning making. We know that higher ed is faced with quite a bit of neoliberalism and the policies that are embedded. We often face with how education then becomes a production for people rather than one that convenes and aims for freedom and democracy and engagement of the community. A lot of my work rooted here in Portland has been around social determinants of health and aiming for healing, particularly around youth and young adults. More recently, I was involved with the Oregon Pacific Island Coalition, and I'll just give you one example of some of the work. And the guiding principle, I guess, with this, and I know I'm looking at the time, I'm trying to really be concise, this framework of social determinants of health looks at the context, the social context, and the factors that impact health or enhance health. But we know that social politically, things like our government, different policies play out in opportunities that are granted to provide health and wellness among our people. We know that positionalities, socioeconomic positionalities such as race, class, gender, and status also play out with opportunities and barriers for living well. But most importantly, we also know that our communities have been colonized, coming from different places and settling here in the United States. And with a racial equity lens, a lot of the work here in the city in the last decade has been around racial equity. Many of the government level entities have adopted equity stances in the last couple of years. And one's role in the academy is to, I guess for me, participate and help bring understanding and meaning making around that, especially being at that nexus or intersectionality of what a professor might do to enhance education and career pathways to serving the city and community. Here's a little summary of the Pacific Island Coalition. It makes up about a dozen community organizations, Pacific Island led. There's also community partners who serve as, I guess you can say, alliances or allies that then link different systems. And the main goal is to impose accountability on the local and state level as you're thinking about health equity. It was founded in 2016 by Pacific Island community leaders and with the leadership of key players in Malotmo County Health Department, particularly Dr. Eileen Dudulau, as well as Rijita, who used to work there. Key people helped shape the equity stance there in the county. So there was a series of hiring people to be part of building up the infrastructure of deploying health equity initiatives. So as this coalition was formed, there were quite a bit of internal struggles, but nevertheless, organizing tactics took place within the system, as well as in the parameters in the community, organizing the leaders there, and then promoting a decolonizing stance. There were efforts to do advocacy particularly at the county level, as well as training around health gaps and health disparities. Fast forward to 2018, they launched the Pacific Island Data Project, which was a collaboration among the organizations, and adopting a community-based research participatory approach. There were 5 research topics explored with the community: sexual health, climate change, mental health, parent and child and health, and chronic diseases. And I get being part of that, co-facilitating some of these workshops, that data project was so monumental in ways that there were efforts to decolonize data. One, to interpret the existing data findings of what was Pacific Island related, but definitely facilitating processes to unpack those variables, make meaning around that, and then pull in an assessment around strengths, community factors, and elevating the voices of the Pacific Island community. Most importantly, I guess you can say, honoring some of the interpretation of some of these health indicators. Fast forward now, they became very sophisticated, and in response to the high rates of COVID here in the western part of the world nation, leaders quickly formed and was part of a task force locally as well as nationally. And then you saw grassroots movement take a height, and then people organized among each other, and then you saw this coalition was part of testing, vaccination drive, and other types of community education. I'll use the last remaining minutes to focus what is happening in academy, because I see my role as a professor and a scholar to not only be part of the community and work with side by side with the community, but also internally in the academy. So a lot of my work has been teaching in the bachelor as well as the Master's of Social Work program. And a lot of the courses I teach are mostly around social justice practice, as well as organizing and looking at policy advocacy. And a lot of my scholarship through the years have been on critical indigenous pedagogy of place. I'll break it down. Critical just means breaking, looking through a lens of a power analysis, pedagogy being a method rooted in changing the power structures, place, looking at environment, the social context, indigenous pedagogy of place. You take and zoom in and it's rooted in native indigenous epistemology, the wisdom of place, and the practices and responsibilities of living well in place. So how does that look like in the curriculum? I guess if I had to put one synonym or verb, it would be healing. Recognizing that injustices exist, indigenizing the voices, centering our cultural ways of understanding, centering the values, reclaiming and retelling our histories and genealogies, and embracing and reclaiming our language and social practices. And then most importantly, I think the last piece, social political development, where we engage with critical ideas among our social networks and learning from each other. That way we can together commit to serving the community. and taking up accountability and responsibility. There's opportunities to engage in praxis, knowledge, action, reflection, and to refine also those insights around accountability is that space to be doing that with community and with that network. And the main aim is to always critique epistemology and ways of knowing and refine that. Another thing that I've been thinking quite a bit about and reflecting about is the social, political, economic identities, positionalities, and more about unpacking the settlers' rights. And here, and this is something I'm sharing with you because it's more, I guess, cooking in my mind, and I am planning to unpack this further because I see that a lot of us in the helping profession and the healing circles need to sift through the rights model. Here, I guess you can say Indigenous rights is limited because Indigenous communities are strangers to their own land. They're displaced even in their homelands. And refugee rights, we see that they can enter the community, a country. There's some sense of protection, but they're escaping from different places. Migrant, they're able to enter a place for employment, school. They can move frequently from one place to another. An immigrant, they leave one's country, they come and live and settle in one place. They are aiming to obtain citizenship of a place. And nevertheless, I guess you can say the mentality is to aim to be a citizen and to have that rights, to access those rights and to be counted and validated as citizen. So this is something I've been reflecting quite a bit and need some guidance from you all, and I welcome some feedback. And how, when we decolonize, how are we making sense of rights, and how should we be advancing some of these people's rights or human rights? And where are some of the tensions in our curriculum? I'd like to somewhat end now, looking at my time, on some things that I've been pondering about and how curriculum and higher education and social work can change or aim for equity and change and to decolonize. One, the curriculum. Present case studies that are from the people, from the Pacific Island community. Provide voices, provide context, historize a lot of the stories, historize policies, bring forth the interpretation of trauma, but most importantly, the stories of strengths and overcoming. Provide analysis of what programming might look like, culturally responsive programming that centers healing, that centers the voices of the people, and then present the complexities of the Indigenous, refugee, migrant, immigrant, settler mentality, and sort of figure out how a social worker or anyone who presumes the role of a healer can deconstruct and sort of blur that and maybe aim to bring forth rights in the different systems that we occupy. In field education, really highlight the need and I guess you can say emphasize mutual aid, the community assets and collective work, and encourage collaboration and partnership. Where, you know, I guess this is to sort of fight the idea that we need to be in a silos and that systems are only in this space, like say the medical model or the medical field versus immigration. They should talk to each other. Most importantly, I think critiquing governmental systemic processes. And here I'm talking about funding and how like state level, county level funding and reporting of quote successful intervention looks like. I think we need to deconstruct that, decolonize that. Most importantly, utilizing community assets. That includes our elders as well as our youth. And then really thinking about translational services, language and literacy components of the work. And most importantly, looking at policy advocacy and envisioning what reparation may look like, especially when we look at different Pacific Island countries and nations and states, and how we as US, the US engages with them and what that means when we've done harm historically. And then lastly, the research opportunities component, building capacity for research from the ground, utilizing research as a tool and a venue, and set of processes that ongoingly examine power, elevating the voices, and shedding light on disparities and gaps, and really having an authentic conversation around data sovereignty. Who owns data? Can we use data to heal? Can we use data to elevate the voices? I'll end here and turn it over to Cynthia. And then if we have time, I would love to share some of a creative piece that helps me stay grounded, but we can do that later.
Thank you, Alma. Cynthia, and now the room is yours. And Cynthia's presentation's title is Issues of Resistance, Place, and Subversion, the Prison Songs of Lili Uokalani.
Okay. I will share my screen. Can you see my screen? Oh, yep. Okay, there it is. Okay, are we good? Okay, great. Thank you, and good afternoon. I am, of course, in Hilo, Hawaii, and this presentation is on historical musicology research I've done on the music that Queen Lili Uokalani of Hawaii composed while she was in prison. Lili Uokalani was overthrown in 1893 by a group of businessmen who wanted to have the islands annexed to the United States to avoid paying tariffs on their exports. A provisional government made up of the Queen's adversaries was installed, and the Queen was imprisoned from January to September of 1895 after an unsuccessful attempt to restore her to the throne. She was not allowed to keep a journal during the imprisonment, so these songs are really the most significant surviving chronicles of the time. I'm short on time, of course, so I'm going to have to move through the material quickly, and but I'll be happy to go into detail on the various songs in the Q&A. I believe that there is a list of the songs and my email in the chat. 7 songs were written during this time. Inoa, Wehi, Kalaniana'ole was composed in around February or March, and I'll talk about this one in detail in a couple minutes. Ku'upoi Ipokalani and Kiliolani were both written in March. These are Mele Hawaii songs, and Mele Hawaii are popular songs. They're primarily love songs and songs about places or the beauty of nature, and they are never, ever political, except for these two. These two have political significance, and in one way or another, they each offer a big mahalo or thank you to the people who are helping the Queen. The Queen wrote 4 hymns in this time. Ke Aloha o Kahaku is a famous one. This is also known as the Queen's Prayer. All 4 were written in the beginning of June, and all 4 were written for 4-part a cappella choir. And all 4 songs, including the famous song, The Queen's Prayer, are about, reflect Lili Uokalani's joy upon hearing the news of the release of her jailed supporters. They express happiness and gratitude to the Christian God for rewarding her righteous actions. Of the 7 songs, only Ku'upoi Ipokalani and Ke Aloha o Kahaku, the Queen's Prayer, were released, and both of them were released as soon as they were written. Ipokalani was written in March, and of course, the Queen's Prayer came out in June. As I alluded to earlier, Ku'upoi Ipokalani carried with it a subversive message. So when it was released into the community, she's passing a message on to her supporters. And over the last century, these 2 songs These two published songs fed into this false narrative on the Queen's time in prison. Most listeners regard Uokalani as a song about the Queen's longing for her favorite flower garden, which it is, because she is locked up in that room and she is unable to enjoy her favorite flowers. And many people think of the Queen's Prayer as a song of sorrow and regret, but it isn't. It's really a song of joy and gratitude. During the imprisonment, the Queen was provided blank sheets of paper with pencils. And you can see here, she drew her own music manuscript lines using a straight edge. This Aloha Oi manuscript was the first thing to emerge from Iolani Palace. And there are actually maybe about 25 or 30 of song manuscripts written up in this manner during the imprisonment. And these were songs that the Queen had composed in years past. And she made these manuscripts because she was getting a songbook together. And that songbook was called Hebuki Mele Hawaii, and it was eventually released by the Queen in 1897. But the thing is, the existence of this Aloha Oi manuscript complicated matters by creating a myth that the song was written in prison. The song was, of course, written decades before Lili was even queen. And the Queen has always said that Aloha Oi is just a love song, but in part because of the misinterpretation of these other songs, the Ku'upui Uokalani and the Queen's Prayer, and this general lack of information on the imprisonment, Aloha Oi is now sometimes regarded as a song of farewell to the Hawaii of old or to the Hawaiian nation. And because the Queen, fought for the values of traditional Hawaiian society, it's ironic that Aloha Oi has become a part of the technology of marketing the Hawaiian Islands as a touristic commodity. I'm going to spend the rest of my time on the Mele Inoa for Kalaniana'ole. I'm from Hawaii, but I don't speak Hawaiian. So unless otherwise indicated, the translations were done by Puakea Nogumeyer, professor of Hawaiian language at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. He Inoa Wehi no Kalaniana'ole is a Mele Inoa, or a name song, and it was written for the Queen's nephew, Jonah Kalaniana'ole, who was jailed at Oahu prison along with 300 or 350 other counter-revolutionaries. And the Queen uses this Mele Inoa to communicate to the people of Hawaii from prison. And it's comprised of 6 installments, 5 of which were set to music. And of the 6, only the first 4 made it out of Iolani Palace to be published in the newspaper. They were smuggled out and they were published anonymously. The song text appears in the upper left-hand corner of the front page of the newspaper. And these are hula kui songs, so they can be used to memorialize events, and that's exactly what the Queen does. This is the first installment, Mai Waikinakona a Iolani Hale, from Washington Place to Iolani Palace. And this installment tells of the Queen's arrest. About halfway through here, we see a reference to someone named Waipa, such as the word of Waipa. This is Robert Waipa Parker. He was the captain of the provisional government's forces. And it was Parker who arrested Lili uokalani, and he later testified against her at her trial. And the Queen considered him a traitor. You can see the next line, the work of Waipa, police captain of the PG. The Queen's spelling of PG over on the Hawaiian side of this is the original side of this. This spelling is significant. This precise notation indicates that the pronunciation of these initials would be with a hard G. So the word would sound as P-G or piggy. Such is the work of Waipa, police captain of the piggy. Okay. The second installment, Lokahi Kamanao-me, thoughts are in unity with my people. In the third line, we see a reference to someone named Waitina, or Whiting. This is William Austin Whiting, and he was the Queen's former Attorney General, and he presided as judge over the Queen's trial. And the Queen did not like that this person who was her subordinate during her reign now sits in judgment of her. A couple lines down, there's a reference to a man the Queen derisively refers to as Willie Kinney, the hot-tempered haole of Waialae. And then we see the following lines: his act has been to fool the people. Tell also you may live. And she warns the people of Hawaii, do not believe his persuasion. Do say that life is in the hands of the royal one who has given her life for the people. Here the Queen is telling the people of Hawaii of the provisional government's threat to execute her by firing squad, and of her decision that she would sacrifice her life rather than divulge the names of the leaders of the Hawaiian resistance movement. The third installment, Aloha ipa iloko, let the love inside be held back. In this piece, Lili uokalani is lending moral support to Kalaniana'ole. About halfway down, we see she names Kalani Yamamau and Keawe. Keawe and Kalani Yamamau are two of Lili uokalani's and Kalaniana'ole's ancestors. They were chiefs who helped Kamehameha I in his quest to conquer the islands. So the Queen is trying to bolster Kalaniana'ole's morale by invoking their names to remind him of their noble ancestral legacy. A little bit farther down, we see a reference to the lehua flower blossom here. The lehua is the bright red flower blossom that you will see on the ohia tree. But the way that she uses this word as an eternal adornment for the lehua, it changes the meaning of the word to one of its more obscure meanings, which is a warrior. And specifically, it is the warrior at the front lines leading the charge into battle. So she is saying to Kalaniana'ole, you are the lehua. So these songs had never been performed or recorded. I made this recording at the University of California at Santa Cruz Music Department. I got together a couple of friends who played guitars, and I played the ukulele. And we got a couple of voice majors, and I'll just play a little bit of this so you can get an idea of what the song sounds like. This is Aloha ipa iloko, let the love inside be held back. Okay, the fourth installment, Ike Hoanai Kanani Hanohano, Seeing the Beauty Again. This mele tells us of the Queen's relief upon finding out that her jailed supporters had escaped death sentences, and some of them were starting to get released. And just like with the hymns, we see here how concern for the safety of her supporters weighed heavily on the Queen. My desire has been fulfilled, my people have been released. This is the fifth installment, Kalakala'ihi Kahi Hapahaiole. Oppressive indeed is the unspoken portion. This is an interesting installment. This installment plays like a scene in an opera. It's very theatrical. There are two opposing characters in this piece. There's the provisional government and Lili uokalani. The installment begins with the provisional government telling Lili'u that she has to acknowledge that she was wrong and that they have the power of life and death over her and her people. There's another reference here to Waikini or Whiting, the judge, William Austin Whiting. You shall go before Waikini, there you shall find your justice. And then in the second part of the melee, the queen steps forth and she celebrates her victory. She celebrates the United States intervention on her behalf. And this is when the US stepped in and told the PG that the annexation would be out of the question if any harm were to come to the queen or her supporters. And this is where she revels in her victory. The word of life is what was uttered, Lili and the people shall live to reach advanced old age. So all of these installments were written as hula kui songs, but the queen was a fan of Western European classical music as well as operas and light operas. And she even had a partially completed opera, a comic opera called Mohelani. So I had the two guitars and ukulele to work with, but I arranged the song as best as I could for a comic opera style performance with our little Hawaiian string band. So I'll play a couple of excerpts out of this and you can get an idea of what a Hawaiian opera can sound like, or maybe what Mohelani would have sounded like if the queen had ever completed it. So this is Kalakala'ihi Kakihapahaiole. I'm going to move it forward to where the queen comes in, makes her appearance. Okay. And yes, I did voice the provisional government as a coloratura soprano. Okay. The sixth installment. This is the final installment for the Mele Inoa. In this piece, the queen is clearly annoyed at something. About 2/3 of the way down, we see the line "Turn to the uplands, awehehene." And of course, awehehene means indicates that the queen is mocking someone. And then we have the line, the offices of Keone Hoana are always working. Keone is the Hawaiian equivalent of name John, and Hoana can mean it can mean a grindstone, but it could also mean to brandish or to threaten. So we researched this, and there was no such person of significance with the name Keone Hoana. So what the queen is saying here is she's referring to someone as a Johnny Blowhard. Then there's the onomatopoeia of the line "uteke-u, teke-teke-u, teke-teke-u, teke-u, teke-u." The queen is imitating the sound of machines. And this onomatopoeia, along with the Keone Hoana reference, suggests that the source of the queen's annoyance is the pro-annexation press. So these are the songs that Lili Uokalani wrote while she was in prison. I'll wrap they were songs of resistance and faith and subversion. I'll wrap up the presentation and I'll be happy to take questions on any of the songs. I wasn't able to get into all of them, but I'll turn it back to Neuralis.
I'll actually pass it to Amity and Carla in case that we have any questions. And feel free to ask questions on the chat, please.
Do you think we have a moment to see the other portion that Alma had created? Everyone? So I'm really curious about that. But
Sure, yes. I mean, yes.
Okay, thanks. I was gonna end with a spoken word that sort of reminds me and hopefully inspires others who may be in a hybrid spaces of healing and facilitating change. So, okay, bear with me. I can share the slides later, but I just want you to hear it first. Unearthing toxicity in White Portland. I am a Pinay scholar warrior of Kapu'aloha and Mahalaya. I wonder how I remain in White Portland since 2009, while mass exodus of people of color faculty took flight. I am a Pinay scholar warrior of Kapu'aloha and Mahalaya. White supremacy have suffocated us in multiple ways. I can't breathe, she can't breathe, he can't breathe, they can't breathe, we can't breathe. I am a Pinay scholar warrior of Kapu'aloha and Mahalaya. I feel like a broken record, telling and sharing trauma stories. No one in power hear thy cries. Why are their ears muffled? What formalities, fragilities, no humilities. I am a Pinay scholar warrior of Kapu'aloha and Mahalaya. I occupy hybrid spaces of isolation, false sense of success and privileges, deep muddy waters of contradictions, always on the slippery slopes. I am running out of breath, climbing those steep steps. I am a Pinay scholar warrior of Kapu'aloha and Mahalaya, welcoming and engaging, collaborating with our communities. I say that we can't do this work alone. We must break these walls of elitism. We stand together, tall. I am a Pinay scholar warrior of Kapu'aloha and Mahalaya. We are a collective, needing to lean upon each other, interdependently united. I call each of you here and there, near and far, in the motherlands and diaspora, to unearth toxic weeds of white supremacy. Our ancestors and people are calling us to lead. I say we need allies to stand aside, sometimes in front and sometimes behind our communities, in solidarity with, for, and by, bringing voices to the lost, unheard, and denied, utilizing our collective privileges to advocate for transformation, healing those who have been traumatized, mattering where it once did not matter, tending to the soul of love in thy roots, water thy hearts and soul, cleansing thy air so we can breathe, watering those sprouts of peace, reclaiming our rights to be alive. I am a Pinay scholar, warrior of Kapu'aloha and Mahalaya, and I call each of you to unearth the toxicity around together. Aloha.
that was really beautiful, as was your song at the beginning. And Cynthia, all of your music was really beautiful. We have a question. Well, actually, it's a two-part question for you, Cynthia.
Yes.
Do you know why the songs were not recorded previously? And what were some of the challenges that you've encountered when trying to record these songs?
The songs were not previously recorded or researched because after the Queen died, belongings and effects were sent over to the archives, the state archives. And yeah, I had a discussion with one of the professors at the Manoa over this. This was a Noelani Arista. And we're talking about this, and it was basically like the politics of the time. So the Queen died in 1917, and certainly at that time, the territory of Hawaii had no interest in bringing this stuff out. And on the other hand, this part of Hawaiian history is the most painful part of Hawaiian history for the Native Hawaiians. And it's just, you know, and there was a kapu on it. And I ran into that kapu when I went and started to do this research, because I couldn't find anyone to do the translations for me. You know, the people that I talked to about doing this, you know, sometimes they would burst into tears and say, "I'm sorry, I cannot do it." But you know, fortunately, Puakea Nogomeyer agreed to do the translations. And yes, in making the recordings, I had about 3 weeks to rehearse the vocalists, to rehearse everybody. And at the time, they were all getting ready to do the spring opera presentation of Kosi Fantuti, and they had never heard, you know, any Hawaiian before except for the word aloha. So I taught them the words phonetically. And you know, when I hear these recordings, I cringe, because I can hear all the mispronunciations. But you know, we got it out. We made the recordings, and yeah, it was the language portion was the most challenging part of making the recordings, as well as doing the research. Of course, you know, there was like this big mystery about that second Mele Hawaii song, Kiliolani. Who was Kiliolani about? And I didn't find out until like until like in the last month or two of the research, that it was, you know, this attendant of the Queen's, who was really just a footnote in Hawaiian history, but like her middle name was Kiliolani, and she was spending every 6 days and nights a week in that room with the Queen. And so there were like these other like little mysteries, but you know, with some of it was solved, but through the research, and other parts of it, you know, Puakea Nogomeyer was able to sort of flesh things out by talking about, you know, these obscure references to like Hawaiian folklore and such. Did I get both questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. I can't even imagine how amazing it must have been when you first got to see those words translated and start to dive into all that.
You know, it was pretty surprising for me, because like everybody else, I thought that this was a time of intense sorrow and grief. And then of course, like that Mele Inoa, she's like socking it to those guys, like in just like you wouldn't believe, you know, this is the lady who wrote Aloha Oi. And then like I said, there's like these subversive there's a subversive message that goes out with that song Pauakalani, and it's a message of they were smuggling things into her. And so what is going out in that song is, yes, I'm receiving the things you're sending me, and thank you. And then with those hymns, of course, like everybody else, I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be so sad. And they just come through as these songs of just joy and gratitude. It's just, like I said, it's just amazing, because this stuff, it was never researched. The Queen was very careful about what she said about the imprisonment. You know, in her book, she just says, oh, you know, we sewed a quilt and did this and that. And it sounds very innocent. But looking at the songs, she was getting stuff smuggled in and out. And she was like, you know, just, you know, part of this big resistance movement. And she was actually the lehua.
Wow. We have a question for both of you. It says, could you please speak about the importance and functions of music and poetic forms in resistance movements.
Oh, should I go first? Okay. Yes, resistance music is like really, that was like my wheelhouse. And when I started this, I initially started this project because I was looking at resistance movement music of the 19th century Hawaii. And yeah, poetics, it's sort of like resistance music is like the opposite or the other end of anthems and hymns, or maybe they're all part of the same, machinery. They're all part of the same technology of unifying thought and getting minds in line. And it just depends on which line you're trying to get people into.
I appreciate what you're saying, Cynthia. I think I totally agree with what you're saying about that, how creative work can be that venue. And I love that you provided complexities with the Queen and the multiple sides of the Queen. And it's marvelous to witness your research, because I can see us leaders being that, and just finding different venues to express whatever it is.
This is like the really unique thing about Lili and Kalakaua. They were both monarchs and they both led their nations, but they were also songwriters. So they were able to use their abilities as artists and musicians to write their own anthems. If you look at the music for like, the kings and queens of like Europe and France and England, they didn't have the ability to write music. So they would have people like Handel or Lili or whoever, Mozart, write their music for them. And so those composers in Western Europe wrote music that they thought that the nobility wanted to hear, music that would sort of reinforce what they thought the nobility would like to think of themselves, to just sort of fluff them up. But here, with this music of these Hawaiian monarchs, for instance, with Hawaii Pono'i, some of you might be familiar with that song, but you can really see what Kalakaua's concerns are with Hawaii Pono'i. He is asking, who among you will stand pono with me? Who among you stands with me and who doesn't? He also, name drops Kamehameha, just to kind of remind people that, this is where we're at. And with Lili Okalani's music, she wrote an anthem, He Himilia Luhuio Hawaii. This is when she was in her late 20s. And it's kind of interesting because at the time she was leading the choir at the Kauai'au Church, and she was really kind of naive about things at the time. She wrote this hymn because, well, the anthem for the United Kingdom was God Save the Queen. So she writes this hymn that basically asks, God to bless the Hawaiian monarchs. And then, of course, Kalakaua replaces it with Hawaii Pono'i. But it's really when she is locked up in that room at Iolani Palace that she really gets into writing that mele inoa that reaches out into the community to try to politically align people with her fallen government. Yeah, anthems are interesting, huh? I mean, but we could talk about the Star Spangled Banner, but maybe we shouldn't. It's if you don't stop me, you better stop me.
Oh no, I personally would enjoy talking about it all day. However, I do want to be mindful of other people's time. So I would like to ask one more question that's for both of you. Are there some special challenges when translating colonist language compared to Alma's translation of Hawaiians to tag along?
I say short answer, yes. An example, I don't have an example right now, but yes, I think it's challenging, especially when words have just different meaning. So, in short, yes. So.
Well, yeah, poor kid did the translations for me, but one of the interesting things about when we started the translation was, he broke like rule number one of cultural anthropology, and he just said, what are you trying to get out of this? And of course, you're not supposed to ever, you're just supposed to let the translations speak for themselves. And I said, but my answer was, I want to know what she's saying to the people of Hawaii. So, yeah, it's a different culture, and it's an oral tradition culture, and you can't follow the rules of research and anthropology all the time.
Alice, do we have any time for more questions, or should we have people follow up with them in the future?
Maybe question. One more question. Maybe we have time for one more question if people don't have to leave, especially the speakers.
Okay, so how do you see island or island living, island experiences, these type of things reflecting in your epistemologies and the work you do? That's for both of you.
I love that question because I think it's so a lot of it is values and how we express those values in a given place. So me being born on the island of Molokai in Hawaii, but yet my ancestors and my parents are from the Philippines, there's certain values, I guess you can say, that change based on context. But I think I want to hone on to the value and how we make sense out of it, particularly around values of honoring our ways of living and making sense of the contradictions that we face, especially when the messages from the dominant place that you're at says that your way of living is not worthy, and finding opportunities to make sense out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I will just say that all music is a hybrid, and here in the Hawaiian Islands we have had this incredible, sort of a mishmash of the different cultures, not only with the Queen's music, but with all the cultural practices and the musics that happen here, and it's a musical paradise.
Okay, so I think we are out of time. It's 5:05. I was just typing here to thank you all for coming and for these wonderful presentations, for both of you, our presenters, for doing such an amazing work. And I'll make this available soon in the Island Feminisms website, so you can watch again or show for educational purposes. Thank you. Have a